I'm a semi-retired former 6-time venture and private equity-backed CEO. And I've led companies from as little as, a dozen employees up to 2,000 employees at every stage, from 2 pre-revenue companies to 2 late-stage private equity companies well into 9 figures. Even if you're taking over a large company, you have to be an entrepreneur. I mean, that's probably the first key personality trait is even if you are a hired gun, you really still need to be an entrepreneur. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, found a company or be a CEO, it is not for the faint of heart.
And so it's interesting to just see that trend, because when you go on LinkedIn, everything is roses and rainbows. And then when you actually get into the weeds and working with these companies, that you realize, okay, it's not so straightforward.
The single biggest mistake I see people make is they underhire for the next stage of growth. And what I mean by that is they need to actually start building, people who have actually worked, getting people who've actually worked in a $2 million plus company. Mm-hmm. The team that got you from 0 to 1 million is probably not going to be the team that goes from 1 to 10 million. The mistakes that I see people make is they, and this is sometimes more on the investors, they pull too much money out of the company and try and goose the cash flow a little too much, where they limit some of the growth opportunities, or maybe take their ability to invest in growth out because they're sucking so much of the cash out of the company. It almost always comes down to people. If you're going to scale, you usually have to have the organization to support the scale. So even if you have the most unbelievable product that sells itself or whatever, you're still going to need to build a team to support kind of the growth of that.
Just expect ongoing problems. So there's going to be bad problems that you're going to have to deal with. And then you do an excellent job. And then a whole nother set of problems come. And it's all on your plate at all times.
If you go back to even the very first question you asked of what does it take? You've got to be pretty much of a problem solver. You got to love solving problems, because running a business is nothing but solving problems and challenges.
Welcome back to another episode of Prospecting Pros. Today on the show, we have RJ along with my co-host, Chris. Welcome to the show, guys. And so I'm not butchering your name. Why don't you spell out your last name or say it so everyone.
Yeah, as John says, and he's a little too familiar with me, I go by RJ, but my name is Richard Jalichandra.
Jalichandra.
Yeah,
I think you got me beat. Mine's Lingenfelter.
I think I can handle that.
Yeah.
So, Richard, you and I know each other well, but for the audience, why don't you lay out some of your background and how you got to where you are today in your semi-retired life? Walk the audience through some of your roles.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a semi-retired former 6-time venture and private equity-backed CEO. And I've led companies from as little as, a dozen employees up to 2,000 employees at every stage, from 2 pre-revenue companies to 2 late-stage private equity companies well into 9 figures. Biggest P&L I've run was about $500 million, and my biggest company, like I said, was about 2,000 employees. Before that, I ran a couple of small bootstrap, back in my 20s and early 30s, I ran a couple of small bootstrapped agencies. So kind of understand the whole life cycle. But yeah, my whole career was really around getting hired by boards of directors and investors to basically take over from a founder, grow the company, optimize it, then find an exit within 2 to 3 years. Hence why I did it 6 times.
What was your first CEO role? Do you remember the company? And tell us more about that.
Yeah, my first CEO role was a company called 𝐸. It was one of the early Web 2.0 social media darlings. And like many of the companies that I jumped into, they ran into a couple of headwinds, some of it external, actually a lot of it external. And so had to completely pivot the company to a different business model and got it away from social media and made it actually one of the very first social media ad networks. And so it was called 𝐸, and we renamed it 𝐸 Media, and eventually, took it, basically had to take it back to zero, and then got it up to mid-20s and about 25% EBITDA margins over the next 3 years. So it was a pretty good little ride. And then, of course, it ended up in an exit thereafter.
So that was your first CEO role. Because there's a lot of people that are probably in individual contributor roles and they want to break off, start their own company, or be a CEO one day. What are some of the things that people should be working on to get into a CEO role? And then I'll follow up with that after you answer that, is what are some of the common mistakes you see from CEOs?
Oh God, there's too many to list. There's all kinds of things because it's a very individual situation depending on what type of company is it. Is it a bootstrap company? Is it a venture private equity backed company? So there's just a lot of variables, and I'm very, very fortunate to have the vantage point of kind of done bootstrap to venture to private equity and kind of been at every stage possible, self-funded to incredibly well-funded, all the above. But in terms of somebody who wants to be a CEO, even if you're taking over a large company, you have to be an entrepreneur. I mean, that's probably the first key personality trait is even if you are a hired gun, you really still need to be an entrepreneur. You need to think about like the mental ownership of a company in a certain way. And I'll be really blunt with you. Most people don't have it in them to kind of do that. It's a very unique mentality and also an emotional kind of build, that you need to have to kind of be that entrepreneur / CEO. Happy to unpack that a little bit more, but that's probably one of the first things I'd say is if you're going to be an entrepreneur and found a company or be a CEO, it is not for the faint of heart. It's something that you really need to think about. Is that your personality? Do you want to put the whole weight and burden of a company on your shoulders and carry it forward?
I think a lot of times what gets put out into the news or on LinkedIn are a lot of the good stories, things that go really well, but most people don't realize 9 times out of 10 it doesn't. And you don't hear about it. It's much, much harder than you think. Right now, you're coaching CEOs. I know you could probably go down a bunch of different talk tracks, but give us a sense on what are some of the commonalities you see in CEOs that are struggling.
So, John, I'd correct your math. It's not 9 times out of 10. It's 999,999 out of a million that what you read in the paper about a CEO, you should just completely ignore because those are the unicorn of unicorn cases. So literally, good or bad, if you read about, a CEO in the press, that's just, there may be a case study there, but particularly the success stories, you might be able to use the failure case studies a lot more usefully, but the success stories of CEOs, you almost have to completely ignore everything you read because it's almost irrelevant if they're being written about in the business press, that it's such an edge case that it probably has no bearing on what really happens for the vast majority of founders, owner operated businesses and even companies, small businesses that have CEOs and stuff like that. It's very unique.
We see a lot of that because we work with so many different startups and CEOs and founders that we get exposed firsthand just to how many fail, within those first couple of years. And so it's interesting to just see that trend because when you go on LinkedIn, everything is roses and rainbows. And then when you actually get into the weeds and working with these companies, that you realize, okay, it's not so straightforward.
Well, we had a few clients just this year that went under. And we didn't know they were in that type of position, but they're like, hey, we're closing up shop. And we're like, oh, wow. Glad they were making payments on time. But it's just like sometimes you don't really know the status of a company. Yeah, it's unfortunate to see.
John, I think to go back to what the original question, though, is what are some of the common things that you see with maybe weaknesses or deficiencies with leaders in entrepreneurs or CEOs, and it really depends on the type of company. So for bootstrappers, and it also depends on the stage and how big and things like that. So if you're under $1 million of revenue, so we'll talk to the really small companies, then it's just hand-to-hand combat where you just got to roll up your sleeves and do a little bit of everything to make yourself profitable. But once companies kind of get above the $1 to $2 million range from a bootstrap perspective, the single biggest mistake I see people make is they underhire for the next stage of growth. And what I mean by that is they need to actually start building, people who have actually worked, getting people who've actually worked in a $2 million plus company. I mean, you hear the cliche all the time that, the team that got you from 0 to 1 million is probably not going to be the team that goes from 1 to 10 million. And so, for example, like what I see happen regularly is when it's time to make the first executive hire, people are still cheaping out and they're not investing enough in the level of talent. And so that's at the bootstrapper level. At like the venture level, I mean, it's real famous. People get out over their skis. They're too aggressive, and they hire too much, and then all of a sudden, they're upside down from a financial perspective because they were a little too aggressive either in the hiring or the marketing spend or whatever the overinvestment is. So again, it really depends on the size, scale, type of company. A lot of private equity companies, you want to take it, we're talking about 3 buckets: bootstrap, venture, private equity. Private equity, the mistakes that I see people make is they and this is sometimes more on the investors, they pull too much money out of the company and try and goose the cash flow a little too much, where they limit some of the growth opportunities, or maybe take their ability to invest in growth out because they're sucking so much of the cash out of the company.
I have to say, I really agree with that about really finding the quality hire and not cheaping out. And I think we learned that with our most recent operations hire, that it's been a godsend and really helped just with the day-to-day processes that me and John were just dealing with every day. And you really don't realize it until it's taken off your plate. So we're like, oh shit, I was spending 20 hours a week on just stuff.
Sounds like you guys got some incredible expert advice.
Exactly.
I wonder who that came from. Who'd that come from?
Well, it's been super helpful because, like you said, Chris, like we were doing some of it before, but when you get someone that comes in and does it 10 times better, you're like, oh my God, why did I make this hire 6 months ago, a year ago? It's a talent that like we literally don't have. So now it's in-house, and it's like doing things that we were just couldn't even imagine were possible is now taken off our plate and just being done at a much, much higher level. So yeah, good advice, RJ.
I do have a question kind of following up on that. Where do you find, like, once a company does pass that $2 million range and say they're like well into the $5 million range, where do you see the biggest probability of kind of like just stagnation? Is, okay, they're not moving anywhere from this 5 million range. What do they typically need to get to that next level in your experience? I know it changes from company to company and just what you're actually doing, but if you could boil it down to just a few points, what would you say is like, this is where you need to focus to take it to the 10, 15, $20 million range?
It almost always comes down to people. If you're going to scale, you usually have to have the organization to support the scale. So even if you have the most unbelievable product that sells itself or whatever, you're still going to need to build a team to support kind of the growth of that, just even fulfilling, even if you've got something that's literally flying off the shelves, you're still going to need to build an organization to kind of even service that and make sure that you can fulfill all the demand. But invariably, it always comes down to people. So in the last year and a half, I've probably worked with 60 CEOs, founders, and it's always people. It's literally always people. And what happens too is, like, when you're kind of between 2 and 5 million, you start having to have an organization that supports that. One thing I've seen in companies of all sizes or whatever, all sizes and shapes or whatever, but generally what happens is when an organization kind of gets to about 40 people, you start having organizational breakdown and you start hitting limits. So I always recommend to CEOs somewhere around the 40 point is when they have to have a serious management team, like a true executive team, where you need to have a functional leader at every part of the company. So that's sales, marketing, finance, technology, logistics, whatever your company is, you're going to need a functional leader that's, if they're not at the VP level, they're close to it, or they're going to be a VP, or an SV or C or whatever. So you need to kind of have an organizational structure, like a leadership structure that allows you to keep growing. The companies that don't, and I say that 40, it's kind of rough. That's just been my experience. Sometimes it's earlier, sometimes it's later. But if you don't have kind of the people infrastructure in place, it's hard to keep up the growth rate. So it's, you can go from 2 to 5 million, on a lot of muscle, with some, semi-talented people. But when you go kind of beyond that, you need to actually start hiring a lot of people in each function. If you don't have leaders in place, it becomes very hard to manage.
There are people that are starting new companies. A lot of times they'll reach out to me, and I will, like, could be friends or someone we worked with in the past, and they will ask for advice. And one thing I'll often tell them, and I'm sure you might do this too with your or you see it firsthand, is just expect ongoing problems. So there's going to be bad problems that you're going to have to deal with, and then you do an excellent job, and then a whole nother set of problems come, and it's all on your plate at all times. And so it's like, regardless of the success, good or bad, just expect the problems. Obviously, the good ones are much more fun to deal with. But when you're talking about the organization, I was just thinking in my head, it's like, you do a really good job, you're growing and you're hitting goals, and then you have a whole nother set of problems. that you need to now get that team in place to actually fulfill and continue the growth. And so that's just one thing that came to mind as you were discussing that.
No, that's a great observation, John, is that if you go back to even the very first question you asked of like, what does it take? You've got to be pretty much of a problem solver. You got to love solving problems, because running a business is nothing but solving problems and challenges. And once you get done with, one set of problems, you have a whole another set of problems. And the bigger you get, the more problems, different kinds of problems that you get. So you're 100% right there. It's literally about problem solving.
I 100% agree. Like making sure you have somebody owning each step of, the departments, especially as you're growing. How do you make sure that quality trickles down? Because this is a common problem that I've seen with multiple companies that I work for, is as they expand, is keeping the same kind of precision focus as you're scaling, the headcount. What has been kind of your workaround to that, just to making sure that the quality doesn't drop off as you're expanding teams and passing off responsibilities to other team members?
This episode is sponsored by Level Up Leads, a B2B sales development and appointment setting agency. Companies always need pipeline, but they oftentimes don't want to hire SDRs internally. The whole process is risky and expensive. You've got hiring costs, onboarding, training, additional spend on your tech stack, a few months to ramp up. And with that being said, SDRs are a high turnover position, and the person you hire might not necessarily work out, so you need to start all over again. That's why companies outsource this. Level Up Leads allocates a team of people, their tech stack, so you can onboard and launch your campaigns in about a week. They set qualified meetings in your calendar so your team has more selling opportunities. Visit levelupleads.io today to learn more. All right, now back to the show.
This is a continuation of something I just said of like, particularly bootstrappers will underinvest in their hires, won't hire senior enough. And so if you look at what venture and private equity do, is if they need to hire a VP of marketing, they're not posting on a job board, and hoping that, somebody answers the job request. They're literally hiring an executive headhunter that goes out and finds somebody who's already doing the job at a company that's bigger than your current company. So that person not only is bringing their own talent, they're already doing the job that you want for a company that hopefully you're that size in 2 or 3 years. And they're also bringing with them people, processes, and systems and stuff like that. So they really can move the ball forward when you make that kind of like executive level hire. And this is why I say it's worth, you get what you pay for. I mean, if you're trying to get somebody who's cheap and never done the job before, it just really doesn't work. And so one of the most common things I tell my clients or ask my clients is, if you're, let's say you're low single digit, millions, and you want to be a $10 million company, first question I ask is, how many people in your company have ever worked at a $10 million company? And how many leaders, of your key leaders have ever been at a $10 million company in that role? And almost invariably, the answer is always none. And so I'm like, it's going to be really hard for you to get from like 3 to 10 million if you don't have anybody in your company who's ever worked at a $10 million company. And so the way venture does that is, I had 2 pre-revenue companies, but because I was venture backed, I was able to hire full exec teams even before we had any revenue. And so all these people, would average 15 years of experience. They were already experts in their functional area, whether it was product development or technology or finance or whatever. And so they already they know how to make money. They've already been doing it. So that's, one of the things. And same thing too. It's like, I'm talking about small companies. Same thing. It's like you run in a $25 million company and you want to be a $100 million company. If you don't have anybody on your team that's worked at a $100 million company, now you don't need everybody, but if you don't have a single person in your leadership team that hasn't worked at a $100 million company, it's going to be really hard to kind of get the roadmap to that growth rate.
RJ, so you mentioned before we started recording, you've worked at small startups. We've discussed that a little bit, but your most recent, before you started your CEO coaching business, you were, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was an agency with 2,000 people. Is that right?
It was a lead generation, demand generation company with about 2,000 employees. Yeah.
So what was that like, managing that amount of people? Because I'll just be honest, we have roughly 60 people and it's a lot. So I just can't even really imagine what it's like at that scale. Talk to us about that.
From a leadership perspective, it was probably one of the easiest jobs I've ever had. Simply because when you have that many people, just for context, my exec team had 12 people on it. And they averaged 18 years of experience and had all been, most of them had been a VP, at least a VP at some point in their career. There were a handful that were promoted into their first VP positions. But I mean, you had a very experienced exec team. You know, when you have a team like that, all you're really doing is leading the exec team. And each of them are managing their functional domain very well because they're incredibly well experienced in running a scale organization within their own domain. So in some respects, it's really easy. I would say, having done early stage, it was probably one of the most fun leadership challenges to have that many people under your wing. And we did it while we were in the midst of COVID too. So there was a personal element of feeling like I was responsible for people's lives and health and all that. That became an incredibly satisfying part of it as well. But yeah, so I mean, in a lot of respects, it's an easier job the bigger the company is.
I wouldn't have expected that. Okay.
But there's different kinds of pressures too. A lot different kinds of pressures because again, we're private equity backed, and they have very rigorous financial demands and things like that. So there's different kinds of pressure.
Thinking back on some of the companies you've been CEO for, you stepped in, because correct me if I'm wrong, you've stepped in as a CEO for all these companies.
Yes, that's right.
What was the most enjoyable, or maybe I should say, where did you succeed most, whether it was bootstrapped or there was funding involved? Like, what was that like, or where did you see yourself excel?
Honestly, the CEO role is something you just get better at every time. So whereas I think every one we had, some level or degree of success, you just get better at the job. And it's funny, I'm actually, one of the latest YouTube videos that I just wrote over the weekend, a script about the 10,000 hour rule and how it applies to CEOs. And if you think about the 10,000 hour rule, that's basically 5 years of full-time work. In the CEO's case, I assume you're working 50 or 60 hours a week. So we're really talking about 4 years. You don't really even get good at it until you've been doing that, for some period of time. Even when you're doing a decent job and you're probably moving the ball forward, there's just you just get better. I mean, it's as simple as that. So, my CEO career was about 20 years in 6 different roles. And, if I count the bootstrapper things, it's even longer than that. But I just got better. I got better at leading. I got better at, pattern recognition of being able to see, the potholes in the road and all that. So that's one thing. Another thing I would tell anybody who's leading a company is do kind of think of it in the context of the 10,000 hour rule. And, until you've got that 10,000 hours behind you, and probably even more than that, you should be a little bit empathetic to yourself that you're probably not going to be as good as even you may think you are already. You're going to get better.
I would also add to that, different stages of a company are going to bring a different set of things you're describing, pattern recognition. So like if you're at 50K MRR versus 500K, there's just a different set of things you need to have your eyes on, a bigger team, things like that. So my point is that you need to get that practice in at that point of the company. It's going to be completely different from one stage to the other.
I will tell you though that the pattern recognition becomes almost instantaneous, when you do it for a long time. So again, like I said, I worked with about 60 companies in the last year and a half. And one of the most common things that I get back is like, I'll get a whole set of problems out and I'll spit out answers like almost instantaneously. They're like, how do you know all that? I'm like, because I made that decision 12 times already. So like I said, you just get better. It's like anything you train for, you just get better.
So now you're running a CEO coaching business. How is it different that you're a one-man team? I'm assuming you might have a few contractors. How is it different now getting new business now that it's your show, but it's on your own rather than running a company and coming into an existing organization?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's really frickin' hard. Because John, you and I have had this conversation before. Like one of the things I train my CEOs on, and I'm going to give you a preamble before I answer the question, but because it's one of the core tenets of my CEO coaching practice, and it's the thing that I feel made me be the best CEO I could be, and that's the whole notion of the do no work CEO. Your job as a CEO is to kind of do no work. And what I mean by doing no work is that you built the systems, people, processes where you've got everything covered. All the day-to-day execution and delivery of the company is being handled by other people, and the CEO is free to focus on growth. and also firefighting where necessary, recruiting, the next level of talent, all those things. But you don't actually have any day-to-day responsibility. Now, it's not an all or nothing thing. As a company progresses, I see people that start off as 10% do no work and then get to 25% do no work and 50%. And invariably, even when you get up to 75 or 100% do no work, generally you might come up with an innovation or enter a new market or acquire a company. And all of a sudden now you go from 75% back to 25% do no work because you got to go in and get something off the ground. Long-winded way of saying I got really good at becoming a do no work CEO to the point where I'd go into a company. My first time, it took me 18 months to be a do no work CEO. And then by my last company, I think I was at 4 months of a very high degree of doing no work because I'd hired a full exec team to kind of take care of everything. So now I go back to being a solopreneur. This is back to your question. I'm going back to a solopreneur where I've got to do everything. And I basically want to shoot myself in the side of the head because I'm like, oh my, I've done a really good job of not working, in the do no work CEO context. Very little heavy lifting, and now everything's a heavy lift. So, I do my own, sales and business development. I do my own proposals. I do my own invoicing and collections, and I'm going to get myself out of that very quickly here, and I'm starting to get myself out of that. So now I've got a few people working on my staff, but and eventually I'll get all the way out of it. But yeah, that first year of going back to work and being a solopreneur was a little eye-opening and shocking, especially when you're trying to be semi-retired. I mean, the reality is this is another thing I coach people who are about to get retired is you're going to have a long time. You better find something to do, whether it's a side hustle, a cause or charity or, some other activity. Mine just happens to be I love helping entrepreneurs and CEOs kind of develop as personally and professionally, but it's still a business.
What are the channels that seem to be working the most for you? And given you're just doing it on your own, is it mainly, I know you've got your YouTube channel, but is it outside of that, is it referrals? What seems to be working at this point for you?
Almost all my business is referral at this point. I am about to get a little bit more aggressive in outbound marketing. And that's actually another funny thing that I can laugh at myself is basically I spent my whole career in some form of internet marketing, different flavors of business models, but it all came back to internet marketing. And I started my career in brute force, telemarketing even, very early in my career. I worked in telemarketing. So I understand all these marketing techniques, and then having to employ them on behalf of yourself, it's just kind of like, oh God, I thought I was done with all that. So now I'm like, coming back to it. But, it's kind of fun getting your hands dirty. Like I said, I haven't really gotten my hands dirty in a long time. So because I would hire people to do it for me. And I know all the things that need to happen. I just didn't do them myself. And so now I'm doing some of these things, and now I'm starting to hire some people to do some things for me. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to laugh at yourself as to like, oh my God, I actually got to do the work now.
So let's say someone's listening to this episode and they're a CEO and they're not quite sure if they need outside help. Maybe they've been plateauing a little bit. What are some key indicators that someone might be ready to work with a coach like yourself?
So first off, I'd say anybody needs a coach. like anybody who wants to be a top performer needs a coach in any profession for that matter. I'm talking about the top elite performers, because all you do is look at the sports world or any entertainment thing. If you look at like somebody like LeBron James, outside of the Lakers staff, he has at least 6 personal coaches. One for nutrition, one for fitness, one for strength, one for mindset. I mean, he's got So if the best player in the history of basketball has a bunch of coaches, and you don't think you need a coach running something. So I highly recommend that people have, somebody that they can talk to, that can, that can tweak a little bit of performance out of them. There's that. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but yeah, I think anybody running a business can use a coach. Some people do it in the form of advisors and board members and things like that. Advisor and board member are actually 2 different roles than coach. So I highly recommend you should work with a coach, and an advisor is somewhere between a board member there, but a board member is really not, there to coach you. They can help guide you and all that, but they're also there for governance. So you can't always share everything that you want to share. And the last thing a board member ever wants to hear is just like, oh man, I'm just depressed and tired today. Whereas a coach, you can go and tell the coach, like, hey, I know we're meeting for an hour, but for 20 minutes, can I just like bitch and moan and use you as my therapist for a little while? Because that's what I need right now. And if that's sometimes what you need to, get the energy to go back and run the company the right way, yeah, do all that.
I'd say for anyone listening, I mean, full transparency, I work with RJ, but one of the best things is that you can bounce ideas off somebody who's done or been in a situation or addressed a certain situation before and you haven't. So it's like an easy way to navigate certain scenarios you've never faced before. It's been really helpful.
One of my first YouTube videos had one thing that one of my clients called me up and he's like, oh my God, that is one of the most poignant things. And it was one of the things I was saying about why you want to coach is you can't talk to your board, but you also can't talk to all your employees because you can't just throw a bunch of dumb ideas out at them because you lose a little bit of credibility. And so that client was like, oh my God, I totally made that mistake 3 times in the last 3 months where I said something to an employee. Then all of a sudden, the minute it was out my mouth, I was like, oh my God, why did I say that? So yeah, you want to be able to share your dumb ideas and float your theories and stuff about where to go with somebody that's in a safe space.
What would be your advice of kind of going out and, finding your first coach? I'm sure you've talked to a bunch of people and some people used you, some people didn't. What would you say is like, hey, this is what you need to go through to kind of determine who's going to be the best fit for you?
I mean, it's a very individual thing. It's almost like finding a therapist or any other advisor. You have to have a good personal rapport with somebody. And then there's generally a coach at every price point that can help you. I mean, not everybody can, afford me, but I'm happy to point them to other coaches that, are more affordable. So that's something that I just think it's not hard to find a coach. There's a lot of coaches out there. Frankly, I think there's too many coaches. Because what I find is a lot of the coaches I meet, they don't even have a fraction of my background, and they're coaching CEOs. I've met CEO coaches who've never been a CEO before, and to me that kind of is a weird thing. Not to say it can't work, because again, as a coach, you're really there to help people develop their ideas and their own leadership and all that. But I think if you're a CEO or a founder, you probably want somebody who's actually been in the chair before. So those would be some things that I would say. And if you're interested in talking to me, I'll give the self plug. You can go to inclinecapital.net, which is my website. You can put it in the show notes to learn more about how to get in touch with me. But the other thing I'd say is I'll give you a whole bunch of free coaching. Just go to my YouTube channel, which is go search either Google or YouTube for RJ, the CEO Coach. And you'll find a lot of my greatest hits of all the things that we cover with many of my clients in videos there. And that's for free.
That's perfect, because that was my next question. So you took it right off my plate. Yeah, you know where to find RJ. Are you active on LinkedIn or not so much? Is YouTube and your website the best place?
I'm on LinkedIn. People reach out to me all the time on LinkedIn as well. So feel free, yeah. And there's only one Jalichandra family in the world. And so you're either going to get me or one of my relatives.
Well, thanks for coming on, RJ. Thanks for joining us, Chris. Appreciate it. Until next time.